Hello, my name is Funso, and welcome to the ADINKRA Talking Drum, a platform that celebrates and amplifies the voices of the African diaspora. Our guest today is someone who has left an undeniable mark across stage and screen, not just in the UK, but globally. Danny Sapani is a British Ghanaian actor whose career spans everything from classical theatre with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre to global screen hits like Penny Dreadful, The Crown, Killing Eve, and Black Panther. Today, we'll be diving into his personal journey, his thoughts on navigating the industry, and where he sees the future of storytelling going, both for himself and the diaspora at large. Danny, welcome to the
Thank you.
ADINKRA Talking Drum.
Thank you very much for having me.
No worries. I thought it would be nice to start with something that brings us to the very beginning of your journey.
Mm,
So, what's a childhood memory that you have that could be seemingly small, that
mm.
you now realize has contributed to how you approach your craft today?
Well, there are probably quite a few of them. I was very fortunate in that I knew what I wanted to do from the age of about 7. Um, and so I gathered various teachers, various allies along the way, and, you know, somehow along that journey, despite many obstacles, um, I managed to achieve my goal to become a professional actor. Um, and along that journey, I suppose there were many people. My father, for one, not always uh, willingly or knowingly leading me on that path. I think my father was in a very interesting character because I think he had an artistic bent which was suppressed as a child, and so in our conversations, we'd sit down, we'd watch TV together. He couldn't help but sort of do a dramaturgical sort of, appraisal of the movie that we were watching and what was going to happen next. He also had a complete works of Shakespeare for some bizarre reason, because I never saw him reading it, but which was signed as well by William, probably not by William. Probably it was a copy, but it was a very sort of hefty tome next to the Bible, which was also in the same drawer. So I would often go and sort of try and work out what this book was, and that became a huge part of my career in the future. Um, Meeting very good teachers that I had along the way. My English literature teacher, who got us to read Shakespeare out loud in class. We did Romeo and Juliet at a boys' school,
Mm.
which was obviously had its challenges and its huge um, opportunities for humour, and but it was uh, to read that play at the age of 15 and to think, actually, this is very close to my own life. This is my life. I know what the Romeo's going through. I know what these feelings are. I know what it's like to have, a lot of conflict in terms of the groups that you're allowed to be part of and the groups that you're not. Um, what we might call gangs now, but at the time it was, just, there are divisions in society that, that you're part of this group or you're not. These elements, having a very, very good friend like a Mercutio, um, these things, these tropes in a young mind, as I was then 15, were, just lit a spark. It was a hugely inspirational for me. And I suppose if you look at sort of me watching TV with my dad, watching The 6 Million Man and having sort of dramaturgical lessons on what was going on, and then reading Shakespeare at such a young age, and trying to work out what it all meant. That's been my career essentially. So yeah, those were my early influences, at least.
I can't help but resonate a bit with your story because, so my dad, a little bit of context, he came over from Nigeria in the 90s and he did Akagun, which was the the Yoruba land adaptation of
Wow.
Macbeth, and he was Macbeth.
Yeah.
And my mum came down from Liverpool as a dancer, and so I've come from a creative background, but they weren't always so happy with me going into the creative fields. And I'd love to know if there was any point where your parents weren't as supportive, or because I think it's a common thing amongst especially West African families, seeing their
Yeah.
kids do something creative.
Yeah, particularly, I mean, my dad played the guitar as a kid and had, was left-handed, um, and had those things sort of, um, coerced out of him, let's say.
Mm,
Even though his two older brothers of a different mother were musicians, and had come to the UK in the 50s. And so, he really came to sort of join them. They had sort of created the pathway. But despite the creative bents within our family, it was still, for him, he had made huge sacrifices in coming here. And the idea that I would sort of squander that being a sort of, performer, you know, that wasn't the sort of height of his ambitions for me. It was to, you know, the outcome had to sort of match the input,
mm,
and the sacrifice was great in his eyes. So, obviously there was the traditional um, professions that we were all sort of in, or at least to sort of get good grades in the traditional sort of subjects, maths, science, English,
standard.
the standard, and with the hope that you become an engineer, or, a
Doctor.
doctor, or a lawyer,
Mm,
but but what wasn't open to them, and I think this is quite common with first generation children, is that they, because of the sacrifice, they are able then to find professions that are not on the call sheet, as it were,
mm,
and are given an opportunity to follow their dreams.
yeah.
That's essentially what uh, that sacrifice affords you. Not your parents' dreams, their own dreams, And I think I think there is a sort of a pattern that happens that, the first generation follow their dreams, and then the second generation become a little bit more conventional, like their grandparents in their aspirations, and so it goes on. But so I'm fulfilling the sort of blueprint in a way of what happens with immigrant children, I think. Um, and but there's always a risk that when I was growing up, my dad didn't really see anybody, despite the fact that Ghana had a huge wealth of TV and films that were held in a big warehouse. This may be an apocryphal story, but the this warehouse that was damaged in a fire had uh, years, going back to the sort of 30s, of old Ghanaian movies. That industry has now been taken over in West Africa by, obviously, Nollywood,
Mm,
but Ghana had a huge um, influence in the movie business, and but despite that, and the National Theatre, was but I think, the effect of coups and various other sort of turbulence through this sort of, particularly through the from the 50s to the current day, through the 80s, it was it was not seen as a profession that had the sort of level of respect that that perhaps it's developing now because of Hollywood and other out um, outputs, across the world. But it's at the time thought that there was no way you could make a living
mm,
from being an actor, and you know being a black Brit, he thought, well, Lenny Henry. So what, you want to be a comedian? You want to make people laugh? Um, he couldn't see that there was a place for me in this profession. And I suppose, he was right. There weren't that many examples. You know, it was Norman Beaton, Carmen Monroe. There were various, but they were few and far between. So I understood his fear, reticence, but I think sometimes we need to start, and and you pave the way for others to follow. So I hope that's what I've done.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think it's actually a good thing when you don't see anyone that looks like you because it means that you can be the one to make the difference.
Yeah.
And you were speaking a lot about being a Black Brit. I was going to ask, has your Ghanaian heritage had any influence in your acting practice?
Oh, hugely, hugely. I mean, one of the highlights of my career was playing in the Scottish play, playing Macbeth. Um, with We set it in a West African country. We didn't specify, but
Mm.
everybody had Ghanaian accents.
They could guess. Read
A
between the
little bit,
lines.
yeah, yeah. And a lot of the cast were either from Ghana and Nigeria, but we kind of localized it um, to Ghana, and we also had the elements of the Scottish Guard in there. There was some of the turbulence that the play sort of deals with, and placing that in a African context, gave us a lot of material to draw from, and it really brought the play to life in a way that um, I had not seen before or since. Um, it was a site-specific production as well, so people moved around. At the banquet, people sat around the table. There was an element of involvement and engagement with the piece and the words, the language that really sort of, doing it in this way came to life. And people often still talk to me about this production. I saw that production and it had a huge impact on me. I'd love to do it again, to be honest with you, because I was probably, what was I, sort of 30, in my 30s when I played that role. And being able to bring my own experiences as a Ghanaian Brit to that production and to my work in general. I came into this industry, I guess, in order to create a voice for myself, because I think that was probably what I felt I needed to do. Uh, and so, and I suppose there was a part of me that wanted to say, look, we're here. We feel as you feel. we experience as you experience. Come in and see what we feel, and know who we are, and by that know that we are all one. There is only one race. We are all the same, because I felt like the way in which I saw African, or people of the African diaspora, portrayed as a child, I recognized that there was something sort of missing. There was something dehumanizing about us, as almost as if we didn't have the same feelings. We didn't experience things in the same way. I'd see people who are essentially my age, children, being treated like adults when it suited, and treated like children when it suited. But something, the sort of crossover, the link of just being, you know, treated equally, was missing. And obviously, I was politically informed as well, and I knew that this was something that went back. Um, and I wanted to know what part I could play in trying to change that narrative. And I suppose that's been my mission. And I've used all parts of myself um, as honestly as I can, um, to bring about that change.
It sounds like you're a huge advocate for doing good for the community,
Yeah,
and people that look like you as
yeah.
well. But I can't help but feel that there's almost like a unspoken pressure on Black people to represent something when they're in the public sphere.
Mm.
And have you ever felt that pressure or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, it happens in very different ways depending on where you are. There are often, when I was younger, I would speak to other actors. They'd be going up for particular parts. There was a period of time where the only parts that were available were drug dealers, the urban kind of world, and that wasn't the world that I grew up in. That wasn't the world that I saw on a daily basis. But that was what was available, and so I was pre- presented with a choice. Do I take these roles because they're opportunities and try and bring some heart and truth and soul and authenticity to them, or do I reject them? And I chose to take them and use them as opportunities, and to you know sharpen awareness, but also to hone my craft. It was an opportunity to get better at what I do. So so that was one aspect, and then of course you feel like you're representing. There's so few examples. You know, you feel like a huge responsibility to represent in the right way, um, which is a difficult thing to quantify.
Mm.
Um, uh, but I took those roles. I took roles where a character wouldn't speak at all. For example, things have changed, and there's more opportunities for us to tell our stories from a place that is true, or truer, and but there's still then the sense, okay, well, now I've reached this point. How do I expand? How do I tell the stories of the untold stories? The stories of people who were, because I feel like you know oftentimes we're trying to do things that people have done before us, but nobody knows that they've been done before us. Our young don't know that because it's not what's made available to them. History in this country is, you know, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the
And Newgate.
Tudors. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the end of our historical lesson. So so I feel a huge responsibility um, as a person of Ghanaian heritage, born in this country, to create stories and tell stories that inform people, um, and so there is a sense of frustration at times, that the access to those stories, and you know I'm not a writer. I would love to be, but I need to create a team around me who I can do the research. I've got the stories. I've got a sense of when it works and when it doesn't work. But I need help with the writing, and I've been searching for a while now,
Mm.
um, and haven't quite found that sort of sweet spot, that collaboration yet. But yeah, I do feel a sense of responsibility to 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 continue my initial sort of remit, which was to give voice, and so yeah, at times, yeah, there is a sense of responsibility, but the important thing is not to let it you know overwhelm.
Mm. Yeah, because looking at the roles you've played a lot of Black period roles, and I'd love to know about how you go about the research,
Mhm.
knowing in the back of your head that some people will be discovering those characters for the first time through
Mhm.
you.
Yeah. I mean, I love the research. I love delving into past stories. There was a book that changed my life. I think it was a book called Staying Power by a guy called Peter Fryer, and it was the history of Black Britons from sort of Hadrian's Wall to the current day. And it's such a wonderful sort of resource for all of these characters who have had such a huge impact on politics, social life, um, economics
Mm.
of this country that we call home. So and then of course to really sort of sketch the missing parts of these characters. That's my joy, really, to because it's often a lot of these people are spoken about. um Although there's people like Ignatius Sancho, for example, who wrote lots of letters, and so you can sort of piece out his personality and his circumstances through these letters. But oftentimes people are spoken about, and so you've got to fill in the gaps. But that's the fun part, I suppose. And I'd like to go even further back, to Kush and Kemet and Axum, and old Zimbabwe and Bono, and um, Ghana, before the Ghana that was before Ghana.
Yeah.
There's so much that we have to draw from. If you think of the British Western dominance, it's like a small slice in the great span of human history. And so we've got so much to draw from, but it needs a lot more support and research to be able to uncover what before the Sahara was a desert. What was under. I've gone off on a tangent, but you understand my point. My point is that I'm fascinated by how we got here, and so I try and find a way to um tell that, not just in my historical stories, but in everybody's got a backstory. Everybody's got a story to tell, and I try and bring that to the roles that I play.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely agree as well. There's so much richness in um, Africa before colonization
Yep.
and the stories that we've got to tell. I just think there's so much there
Yep.
that I'm sure once someone discovers it and has the funding behind it, there'll be a ton of films that come
Yeah.
out in
Yeah.
theatre
Yeah.
around that. So that would be really
I
exciting.
mean, one of the things that we still haven't been able to do, so sort of would be considered Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, because they thought the Nile flowed upwards. And so Kush, Kemet, this, if you go to the museum in Egypt, all the pyramids that were built in Lower Egypt, which is now Sudan, they had their own script. We still haven't been able to decipher that script.
Mm,
But there are incredible characters like a woman called Amani Reynolds, who held Augustus Caesar to a truce. You know, we know about Boadicea, we know about, you know, sort of other great characters from history who did amazing things, but nobody knows about Amani Reynolds.
mm,
They know about the Kandaki Queen, one-eyed Kandaki Queen, because uh, Plutarch wrote about her, and he was a Roman historian who was writing about her probably 100 years after the event, but also he was writing about her from the opinion of how great Rome was.
mm,
But even so, this African queen held the most powerful nation in the world to a truce.
yeah. Wow.
you know, I think that there's so many stories like that will, my daughter growing up to know that, to know about Yaa Santuar, for example, or Armani Reynolds, will just give her a different sort of sense of herself in
Mm.
the world.
And even the actors going up to play those roles, if
Yeah,
they're to be created.
yeah,
So I'm very sure, because I didn't know, and I'm sure that there's so many other people that will rediscover their history through having to research those roles that they were auditioning for and
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it comes down to finances in the end. I mean, the Meroitic script is there. We just don't understand it, so we aren't able to hear their voices
Mm,
through their own language, through their own writing. And it pains me to think of how we have been portrayed as having no history
mm.
when we
Such a
created
rich
history.
history. Yeah,
We are history,
100%.
and so that that is something that we need to change.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I'd love to just bring you back onto some of the characters you've played. And I think we can't go through this podcast without talking about The Crown
Yeah,
and the part that you played in that and the dance that you had
yeah.
as Dr. Kwame.
Mm.
How did you feel preparing for that role and during it and afterwards?
Yeah, well, preparing for it was interesting. I think when I got the part and I spoke to Stephen Daldry, who directed it, it was really just to be a sort of small footnote in the drama about, Kennedy, Jackie O, and the Queen. Um, but after, shooting some scenes and to doing some stuff, Stephen decided that he wanted to push Kwame Nkrumah's story further
Mm,
forward, and so they wrote more scenes to add, which
mm,
was very satisfying. Um, there was obviously some elements that I didn't agree with. Kwame Nkrumah, for a start, wasn't a communist, and they portrayed him as such. Also, at the end of the episode, they tend to sort of do a little appraisal about what happened to the characters afterwards. Obviously JFK got assassinated. This happened. That happened. They tend to put that at the end of the episode. They didn't put something up for Kwame
mm,
Nkrumah, which I thought was a missed opportunity. Um, I think Kwame Nkrumah is obviously somebody I've always been, the father of the Ghanaian nation. I've always had a fascination for him and his life. And I was able to guide the sort of, for example, they didn't have any kente cloth for him to wear when he met the Queen, in and various other sort of elements that so I borrowed my uncle's cloth, and I brought these little bits to the story that that I mean, they talk about cultural appropriation, and I think that we can go a little bit too far with that sometimes. But in this instance, it was very important that I had someone, that I was able to guide them
mm.
in a way that they hadn't had they cast somebody who wasn't Ghanaian, it would have been very different.
I hope you got a costume credit for that.
No, I didn't get any credits for that. It meant more to me and to my family
Yeah.
to play this role than they could, ever begin to imagine. So, um, and then, but what it probably did more than anything was whet my appetite to tell his story, more comprehensively than it was told in The Crown.
Mm.
And I'm actually going to see a play tonight in Manchester. I'm going all the way up to
Oh.
Manchester to watch a play.
Well, thank you for coming here just before that.
Yeah, but it's called Liberation, and it's about the conference that was held in Manchester, of all the who would be then become the heads of state for the independence movements in Africa, the end of imperialism. After the Second World War, America said, you empires, you have to get rid of your colonies, you owe us money. And so, one part that was part of the push, but also people have been agitating for a long time. In Ghana, for example, all the people who fought in the Second World War, who were promised land and all sorts of things when they got back to Ghana, didn't get it.
Mm.
So they they protested, and what is called the Big Five, or is it the Big Seven? I'm never entirely sure. Were made up of these people who set up this Pan Africanist conference, and Jomo Kenyatta was there, Kwame Nkrumah was there, George Padmore, who's Trinidadian, Mrs. Marcus Garvey,
Mm.
uh, there were all these great people who were there who had this kind of conference, and then they went back and got themselves together, and Ghana created its independence in 1957, the first country in what was called sub-Saharan Africa. I hate that term. Sub-Saharan, below the Sahara, created their independence, and were able to, forge, their own story, moving forward, and these conferences that happened in Manchester. I think there was a Pan Africanist movement meeting in West London and in North London as well, at the Irish Centre. They'd been meeting. A lot of them came here to be educated as well, here in the States, and they were a group of young people that were ready to take over, and that's what they went off and did. So this play talks about that moment in history, which I just think is fascinating.
Mm.
They were all in their sort of 20s,
Mm. The
and
best time to be a rebel.
yeah,
Early 20s.
completely, yeah, your early 20s, and they were smart, and they had their stuff together, and you know and Kwame Nkrumah wanted to create the United States of Africa. He
Mm.
wanted to create their own currency, and that was a huge threat to Western power. America encouraged or coerced, Britain, France, and Germany to get, or not Germany, obviously they lost the war, but Britain, France, and Belgium to give up their colonies, as part of their, because they didn't want to, you know, um, to have that kind of competition, I suppose. So what they did was then they, through the CIA and the FBI, they destroyed um, the sort of, Africa became sort of pawn in the Cold War, and so then it was Russian dominance that they were fighting against, and somehow we got lost in the middle of all of that. But I still think that there are details. For example, the murder of Patrice Lumumba. Nobody has ever been brought to justice for that.
Mm.
Um, uh, so there are elements to that story where we are Africans, I say, are just bit parts in the story of uh, larger forces. But I think those elements should be explored. They would teach us something about the world we live in today and why.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you obviously are very well versed in African history. I would love to know if there was a role that you did, and it doesn't have to be a lead role or anything big, that actually taught you something about yourself on a personal level.
Well, every part you play, I suppose, there is a therapeutic element to playing another person, trying to empathize with another, body, be they real or imagined. It reveals yourself to you, and so that there is that, and you try and find a way to express that, to have a similar effect on the viewer. Um, but specifically, um, the parts that have taught me most about myself um, are probably roles that have mainly on stage, I think, because you have more time to explore every night what how you engage with a character or a story and an audience night after night. That does have a sort of almost sort of spiritual experience, really, in terms of the way in which you explore a second life, but it's your life at the same time. That can have profound um, sort of spiritual ramifications. I think that are quite interesting. Um, but yeah, I think all of them to some extent, because they ask questions of you. What would you do in this situation? That's the first question. And what did this person do in this situation? And following a script, and what does that say about who they are and their circumstances? I think that is great life lessons in storytelling.
Mm, no, totally agree. I think as well, I'd love to know between screen and stage, where do you feel the most seen
Yeah,
and
I get asked that question quite often. I suppose, obviously, on screen you reach a much larger audience, so there is that. But there is something more revealing, I think, on stage. There's nowhere to hide.
yeah.
And that can have its advantages and disadvantages, but I think on the whole it's mainly an advantageous thing to experience and to um, and to witness.
Mm, amazing. So our final question is, what have you got coming up?
So I am not allowed to say what I'm doing next. I'm not allowed to be specific
Oh
about
yeah,
it,
hint at
but
it, tease at it.
hint.
Yeah.
One of them will involve 8 months filming in Ghana, which I'm very excited
Wow.
about.
Very interesting.
With somebody who you all know. As we'll wait until that the press release comes out. I think that actually there is a lot of press about it already, but just not my involvement as of yet, because I suppose that hasn't they just haven't leaked that information yet, um, um, or broadcast it.
Mm,
Um, the And then there's things that are being edited as we speak. There's a couple of TV things that are being edited. One of which is a thing called The Undeclared War that should be out fairly soon. And as I say, I haven't given up on my producer writer hat. I'm sure that will bear fruit at some point.
for sure.
So yeah, but you're an anthropologist, right? You studied anthropology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how do you find that what does that sort of give you in terms of being able to understand the world we live in now? Is it sort of
It gives me an appreciation of humans in general and sees us as more similar than we are different. I think that
yeah,
we create so many differences between each other
right,
when in actual fact there's just maybe different languages for the exact same action, feeling,
right,
thought. So
and
yeah,
exploring that through sort of history and through archaeology and all of that. Is that something
more so social anthropology.
social?
So leaning more on doing lots of studies about, I've done race, class,
Okay.
um, gender, like so many different themes
Yeah,
across the world.
yeah,
So yeah, I
yeah, yeah,
find it really interesting and
yeah,
helps me hone in on my craft.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you write too, or
Yes, I
yeah, yeah,
prefer to
yeah,
write. So
yeah,
I think that's that thing of you were saying of wanting to start writing stories that
yeah,
speak to us as a
yeah,
people
yeah,
and get us on screen and tell
yeah,
stories that we want to be seen and that haven't been seen yet. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So we
that's
share
something.
the same desire to tell those stories.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
great.
Yeah. So, as the tradition goes
Yeah,
on the ADINKRA Talking Drum,
sure.
we like to offer our guests a little gift to part with.
Thank you very much.
And in your case, we've got a selection of 3 pairs of socks.
Okay.
I'd love you to choose which one speaks to your soul today. So it's kind of like a vibe check per se.
Well, the first ones over here, these remind me of some socks that my dad used to wear.
Mm.
When he was sort of being very kind of stylish, he had a sort of beige suit, with slightly flared, bell bottomed,
Mm.
and he would sometimes wear socks that looked like these, or all those red and black ones as well. They've got a very sort of distinctive.
Well, if you turn it around, there's a message on the back as to what the symbol means.
Okay,
So, are
African heritage.
you locking in the red ones, or are you going to go for the?
I don't know. I'm gonna have
Need
to.
to feel them all and see.
Yeah. Heritage. Do they all have that? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I have to. I think. I think I'm going to go with these. These were my
Yep.
initial.
And they'll match your
Sense.
bag as well.
Yeah, and they'll match my bag too. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Amazing.
nice when you just have a little hint of color. I think they've got. Yeah, they've
No,
got a nice pattern
exactly.
to them.
Fabulous. Well, before we go, it's time for our segment, The Final Drum Roll, where we spotlight a brilliant brand, business, or story from the diaspora. Today, the spotlight is on Echo Brewery. Based in London but inspired by Nigerian brewing traditions, Echo creates craft beers that fuse African ingredients with modern brewing techniques. Whether it's their hibiscus pale ale or their coconut infused stout, Echo is redefining what African beer can be. Find them online or at your nearest independent shop. So if you want, you can have a try of one of the beers. See what you think. It's a Thor hammer. No, but Marvel. You've done Marvel.
Yeah.
The got it.
There you go.
Perfect.
Okay, to drink in the afternoon.
Yes, it's post lunchtime, so
Very hoppy. That is delicious.
perfect. And that's a live reaction as well. So
Really good.
oh, thank you so much.
Fan of Guinness.
Yeah.
I like a good stout, but that is very smooth.
Mm.
Yeah, very tasty.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Danny.
Likewise.
Very nice
Can
to
I
meet
pour
you.
you a glass?
Oh. We've got to wrap up, but
Yeah.
it was really, really lovely to speak to you, and I wish you all the best in your career moving forward.
Thank you. Likewise. Take care.